Hi, I'm James Humberstone. So a little bit about myself as a composer. I grew up in the UK, but I've spent my whole adult life in Australia since I finished my first degree at Exeter in the UK. The composer who had the most influence on me when I was a young adult was Howard Skempton, whose piece Lento I discovered when I was, I think, about 16, around the time I was writing my own first orchestral music for the fun of it. And before that I was lucky because I'd had a series of music teachers who really encouraged me to compose and either perform my music or found ensembles to perform my music for me. So that was cool. I discovered Howard Skempton's music around that same time. I wrote my first orchestral piece and my first wind band piece at Exeter University. I sort of furthered my study into that music that I found interesting. Howard Skempton is an English composer who, without wanting to sort of stick everyone in a genre, comes from sort of post-experimental tradition. So there's all this fun, crazy stuff that happened in the 50s and 60s with composers doing new things with music and thinking about music in new ways. And one of those was John Cage, who's a pretty exciting guy, and lots of other people who did really cool things around that time. But they influenced other composers, and in the UK, Howard Skempton was one of those. So when I was discovering Howard's music, I was also discovering the music that led to why his music was how it was, and that was very inspirational. And that's how I think, rather than developing an aesthetic, well, I guess they develop their own musical voice by studying other people's musical voice and working out what they want their music to be by the music they like. So I think that's where a clear aesthetic developed for me. And I guess we should, consider exactly what we mean by an aesthetic, because it's quite complicated. But I guess that thing about what's important in music, why is it that you're making the music that you are making? And to art music composers, that's important, because even if we don't all want to write, madly new music, we do want to have a clear voice. We want our music to sound like our music, to sound like us. And so that's how I developed that. Now I came to Australia and I studied with Anne Boyd while I did a master's degree, and very slowly established myself as a composer in Australia. And Anne had a huge influence on me. I think perhaps just because I was a more mature composer and more open-minded to a lot of ideas. But Anne is a very considered composer. Actually, in many ways, I've never thought about this before, but she's very like Howard in that I think with both of them, they could tell you exactly why every single note is where it is in one of their pieces of music. Very considered, very thoughtful, really knowledgeable musicians who apply that into their own musical output. And so that became very important to me. And I think that part of that and my own interest in other musical genres, but also studying with Anne, made me a pluralist. That is to say, even though I have a voice and I have an aesthetic and I make the music that I want to make, I'm really interested in all music for everyone. And so that's why recently I've been working cross-genre. I've also especially in the first decade of this century, 2000s, wrote a lot of music for children and community ensembles. So I'm, which you always have to adapt what it is artistically that you want to do to fit what the children can do. So yeah, I think that's, and I guess the final thing I would say about my aesthetic is that somewhere in there's an element of social justice. So something about, the thing about children, my children's opera, the whole idea is that it's for musically untrained children. So for kids who go to schools where they don't necessarily have music teachers, they maybe can't afford private music lessons. So you can literally drop that opera, which is obviously a very kind of high art classical form, but you can drop that into an everyday music classroom with a load of resources and stage it and put it on, and it integrates with the whole curriculum. And yeah, obviously with some of my later projects, including the 2 that I'm working on at the moment, Odysseus ongoing, still writing and rewriting, that has got a very big social justice element to it, especially around the refugee situation in the world at the moment, and also Home Song, which is a song cycle that I've just had a public workshop of, but we haven't premiered it yet, which is about the issues that a soldier coming back from Afghanistan faces, but also that's sort of the narrative, but much deeper in that, questions of masculinity and what it is to be a man in 2017 or in the modern day, family, secrets that we keep, deep stuff.